Good morning. Hemshech Ayim Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1238. Aleph Reish Lamed Ches. Yesterday we learned, continuing explaining the Zohar on the top of page 1237. So we're talking about that Zivuk Shalom, a complete union of Chachma and Bina, of Abba ve'Ima, is when they are gazing at the Metzach, at the forehead of Arich Ampin. And as he explained, which reaches up to Atik Yemen, all the way to the highest levels, and Aradla Reshid Le'isyada, and that, during the Eisrotz in a special auspicious time, radiates into Zah. But Zah on its own is its main power is emotions, and that's where the dinim and gvuras, the judgments and severities, are awakened and stimulated on its own, because metzach is the level of a rotzen, a commitment and a determination, but it doesn't have radiating within its seichel, because the seichel has already passed and been forgotten. So there's a level of rotzen atachten, where the rotzen is driven by a very powerful contemplation that keeps it vitalized, alive, and passionate. But then there's a state where, like Metzach, where it's concealed. It's still a strong determination. And he said in some ways it's even strong, and he says it's even stronger than determination, the rotzen al pi seichel, when the seichel is awakened and revealed, because that can waver. But bottom line is, but the moichin is not there, and because of that, it's like a state of immature state. It's still in a state of, like a child, where the emotions are dominant and the din and gvuras are dominant. Doesn't have yet that balance. Doesn't have the balance. That's the metzach. And Arich Ampin, that auspicious moment, time when there's a radiance and a revelation from a higher level, as shall be explained, that silences and quiets down those severities and judgments. In Aveda, he explained this is the two states during davening, when you're contemplating b'shas, tefillah, mizbeinin, on a divine contemplation. That's how a person comes to awaken a desire, a tzamalach hanafshi, a thirst to be absorbed and to be encompassed within Elikus. And this is in a very alive and a very dynamic and vitalized fashion. But after that's the first level, that's the Ratzon HaTachten, where the Moichin is radiating. And then the level of Metzach, the forehead, is when, after davening, when that Moichin recedes, because a person can't be in that type of state of awareness and a stimulation all day long. So it passes, the love, and so passes. For people who are Balei Esek, business people, or people involved in the world, because they have to go to their work and do their work, Belei Lev, which means they have to do it with a heart, but not completely, as we discussed. Not the head in galoshes, only the feet in galoshes. And even for those that are Balei Teira, that are Yeshvei Aholim, that study, still, during the study, they don't have the same awakening as they do during davening. So what do they have? What remains is the heskem, the determination and the commitment. And that remains in a very strong way. So even when they spilus, the excitement is dissipated, the commitment and determination remains. Okay. So we've covered part of the Zohar. It's not complete yet, but that piece with Zah, he's discussed what that means. And now in Aveda, the difference between the two stages, two levels. So we'll continue learning now the new paragraph on page 1238. It says like this. And now, Nizbar Le'il, she has Beis Minei Rotzen. On the previous page, we learned there's two types of desire. Remember? Rotzen Ha'elyon, but Rotzen HaTachten. The Rotzen Ha'elyon, the words that he used was a Rotzen Ha'elyon, a higher Rotzen, which is not due to seichel. The words he actually used was shulamayla min hatam, It's not mitzad etzem nefesh. It's coming from the core soul. Sheyesh la'atiyah b'hamshachah lezeh. That has an inclination and a leaning and being drawn to something. In other words, it's actually how we are fundamental at ourselves. It's not due to a contemplation that awakens and tells you this is a good thing to desire. Like he went on to explain, the Ratzon HaTachten is already, your mind is working to the point that the Ratzon, you can even want something that naturally would not be what you would like. Or you could not want something that naturally you would like he said. So now he's going back to Ratzon HaElyon and Ratzon HaTachten, which tells us clearly that everything we spoke about was Ratzon HaTachten. So even though it's sure at the bottom of page 1237, he did say that determination has an element in it. So we'll get back to that. If he does get back to that, we remember that he said that. But overall, he'd been talking two levels in Ratzon HaTachten, whether the seichel is revealed or the seichel has receded in the background, and the only thing that remains is the determination. But now he's saying, we explained that there were two levels of Ratzon. Shalzeh Amar B'Zeyar or Isa B'Zeyar. And this the Zohar says, he's bringing now a Zohar that confirms or ratifies the idea of these two levels of Ratzon. The Zohar says an expression, Is Ratzon v'Is Ratzon. There's a desire and there's another desire. So we see from the Zohar that there are two levels of desire. Just for the record, Chassidus, this Is Ratzon v'Is Ratzon can be explained in different ways. But here he's explaining it in this fashion. One that comes from the core soul. The second that comes from seichel, from contemplation. And that itself, we said there's two levels. Okay. Im Kain, so based on that there's two levels of Ratzon HaElyon and Ratzon HaTachten. Gam b'Ratzon HaElyon shalamayla ma'atam. Also in the Ratzon HaElyon, the higher level of desire, that's higher than reason, meaning it's not driven by logic and a contemplation. It's not driven by tam. Yesh gam kein, Ratzon she'en lo tam. Yesh gam kein bedugma kazu k'may b'Ratzon HaTachten. Also has something similar to what we find in the lower desire that is driven by reason. The hainu, which means shagam boy, also in this higher desire that's not driven by reason, l'mayla mitam, yesh by meichin and midas. It also has meichin and midas. In other words, it has an intelligence and emotions. Ubchinas mitzcha. Shuyin a heskim. And also the level of mitzcha, the forehead, which is the heskim, the determination or the commitment. So you say, 1 second here. Didn't we just say it's higher than reason? So why are you saying it has moichin and midas and metzach? So he's going to explain what that means. But remember, going back to the Zohar, he had said that the Zohar said clearly, in Atik, there's 10 spheres. So Atik, which is higher than all these levels, has the spheres in them. Arich has the spheres. And they also have a metzach. There's a forehead in Atik and there's a forehead in Arich, as discussed in that, as the Seir said clearly. Mitzchad is galib Atik Ratzon ikra. So in other words, in all levels of Ratzon, there is structure. And metzach is the level of heskim, determination. The seichel is not revealed. It conceals the seichel, but it's considered to be the intensity of a determination, of a commitment. That's the level of metzach. So he's saying, just like in Ratzon HaTachten, you have the Ratzon HaTachten where the seichel is very revealed, and you have where the seichel, the intelligence is not revealed, but it's only determination. The same thing, the Ratzon HaElyon, similarly, you have moichin and midas, a structure of moichin and midas, and metzach as well, a determination. Now we have to understand what this means. In Ratzon HaTachten, it's easier to understand. You contemplate on something. You, for example, contemplate that God does not want you to follow your natural desires, your taivas. So your Ratzon becomes firm and says, I will not give in. It could be that it's firm like during davening where you feel it very strong emotionally and intellectually, or you don't feel or think about or understand it right now, but you made the commitment. That's in Ratzon HaTachten how it works. How does it work in Ratzon Elyon? That's what he's going to explain now. That on the higher level, and this is going to further explain the Zohar, because the Zohar clearly is talking about a Metzach in Zoh, a Metzach in Arich, and a Metzach in Atik. So he's now explaining what this means in the Chassidus Chabad language. Va'inyanhu. And this is the inyan of understanding the Moichin and Midas in the Ratzon Elyon. In different words, it's basically how do we understand the spheres in Keser? In spheres in Atzilus, they're conscious faculties, conscious attributes, intelligence, cognitive, emotional, Chabad, Chagas, Nehi. But how do we understand these dimensions in the levels that are in the superconscious? Is essentially a different way of posing the discussion here. So he says like this: "Va'inyanhu, in Yedua, because now it's known sheyesh gam kemidas b'Ratzon Elyon. In the Ratzon Elyon, that's not driven by reason; it's driven by the superconscious state where a person is just net etzem hanefesh. There's also midas there. There are midas. The question is what these midas mean, but there are midas, which means there are inclinations, there are dispositions, if you wish. They're not going to be similar to the midas in Atzilus in Zoh, but there are midas. The nikra, these midas are called Tura Chashecha. Dark, like dark hills, dark mountains. Tura is a mountains. Now, the interesting expression, what does dark mountains mean? Dark hills. And why are they dark? So he's going to explain. In the parentheses, he says, elsewhere, Mavur is explained, he's not going into detail, but he says elsewhere there's an explanation between the desire itself, someone wants something, and the midas in the Ratzon. The different inclinations or the different dispositions in that desire. He doesn't say what it is. He just tells us, "Ma'ayin mashnas bar le'il dibra maskal tiku ha'alef." To look in the Maimer, the first tiku, because there's several in Ayin Beis, tiku ha'alef. I'm going to quickly peek there. What does he say there? I thought he referred to this already. Did he not? Yeah. On the previous page, he also mentioned this Maimer. At the bottom of the page. Bottom of page 1237, he mentions exactly the same discourse. So let me just look at it a second, just to see if I can quickly pick up what he's trying to say. Oh, well, okay. Okay. I'll explain it as we go along, because it's not just the parentheses, it's also part of what he's going to continue saying. So just bear with me. I'll go back to this parentheses shortly. And the reason it's called dark mountains, because dark always refers to concealment. When you say something's illuminated and light, it's called Ur. Choshech means it's concealed. That's higher than the level of Gili. The Hamidah Shal Pi Hatam, emotions that are stimulated based on a reason, That's called Nikra Tura de Nehera. That's called mountains of light or illuminated, bright mountains. Because they're in a state of gili. So they're illuminated. They're revealed. They're the midas is a and a keli. So, for example, let's say your mind tells you to love something. You come to love it. Love has a very manifest way of expressing itself. There's the power, the energy of love, and there's the container of love, how the instrument or the channel, how you express that love to someone or to something. That's a and a keli. That's not in the level of rotzen. That's in the level of amida. That's a part of the faculties of the human being, just like the faculties other faculties we have. The liya shaboy de atamba seichel, being that it's coming due to a reason and a logic or an intelligence, has a magbilas amidus that confines or defines the emotions. Shein be'erech hakelim liyas bechinas gili. They should be commensurate with the containers, and therefore they should be in a form that they are revealed. Aval midas sheberatzen, but the midas, the way they are in the person's desire, it means we're not talking now the expression of the emotions. It's that your mind, your desire relates to these emotions. They're not commensurate and proportionate to any container. And they're not in any form of revelation. And due to that, they are midas that don't have a limit, as opposed to the midas al pitam, according to reason. Like the great love of a soul to God that's beyond reason. It's just because it's like the child that naturally loves its parent. It's not due to a reason that created this love. It's a natural part of the Ratzon Atzmi, like he said, part of the Etzem HaNefesh. It's not bound to reason. Does not need a reason. And therefore, it's a love that doesn't have limits. So as soon as you have reason and logic about something, you have the limit as much as your reason justifies it. Let's, for argument's sake, let's go back to the example he gave, that you're avoiding material pleasures because that's not what God wants. And you come to contemplation, you realize it's, even though naturally you'd be drawn, you stay away from it. But that is a limit. It's not unlimited. It's based on how much you understand it and how much you appreciate it. Like anything in life, if you become attracted to something or you fall in love with something based on a reason, so it's going to be as strong as your reasoning. If at some point it goes beyond what your reason would allow, the love will stop. It's like an avat tluya b'davar in a certain way. It's a certain type of conditional love based on the reasons. Whereas an avid that's coming, what he calls l'mayla mitam, and coming more from a core place that's not based on that, also has an expression of emotion, but the emotion, number one, is in a concealed state. It's all still part of that rotzen. It's not manifest in any specific way yet, and it's unlimited. There's no limit to it because it's coming from the very core of who you are. Now, what does this mean exactly, the midas sheberatzen? I'm going to go on the limb and say the following, even though I think he's going to explain it, but because it's so critical to understand this. It sounds like he's saying that before it comes into an actual actualization, that the ratzon that's embedded inside of every one of us, a core desire for different things that we naturally desire, not due to a reason. It's part of who we are. So when it's on that level, it's still on a level that's part of the embedded DNA within you. It's not expressed yet. That's what I believe he's going to explain, why it's called, therefore, why it's concealed. So he says, just like desire in general, the desire for anything, is in a state of concealment, and unlimited within itself. So whatever desire a person has, the desire is the driving force Right now I'm teaching a class here in Ayin Beis. You're participating in this class. We're learning together. We all have a desire for be here, or else we wouldn't be here. But the desire is behind the scenes. It's implied. It's obvious that it's there, or else you wouldn't be here. But what is active and revealed? The fact that we're sitting and learning and using our minds. In other words, on a faculty level, on a revealed faculty level, the desire is not obvious. It's just, that behind the scene, the desire is driving anything a person does. Take away Ratzon and everything stops. But the Ratzon itself is not in a revealed state. What's revealed is the thing the Ratzon wants, the object of the desire. But the desire itself remains something within your spirit, within you, that is drawn to something, then you act on it. But as we learned, if you remember, in volume 2 at the end, there's a Ratzon that can be embedded in you that you're not even acting on. Every one of us is born with a desire, for instance, to have a home, with a desire to have a spouse. It could take years before you're even conscious of it. So Ratzon is part of the very wiring of the soul. It's obviously lower than the Etzem HaNefesh, because the soul is the root of everything. Tainug works together with Ratzon. I don't know if he's going to go to Tainug. He may or may not. In Biuri Hazer, on this topic, he does. But for practical purposes, we're not talking about desire. So desire is one of the faculties. We call it a koyach makif. Like in the levels of soul, nefesh, ruach, and neshama are revealed conscious faculties, behavioral, emotional, and cognitive. Chaya is Ratzon, and Yechida is Tainug. So the spheres, in the conscious spheres, the revealed attributes are Chabad Chagas Nehi. Arich in Keser would be Ratzon. Atik would be Tainug. So in the context that we're speaking, it's behind the scenes. It's a koyach makif. It's not localized. It's not revealed only through its effect. It's almost like the soul is commanding the faculties, which the command comes from Ratzon. Ratzon says, I want to learn this morning. So now the mind is set up and follows what the desire says. The Ratzon is like the Ratzon HaMelech. The king has now decreed. Actually, in volume 1, there was a whole arichas about how Ratzon is different than faculties. And one of the things that the Ratzon doesn't consult with the faculties. It commands. Now, command doesn't mean that you don't want to do it. It just means Ratzon is not consulting. Ratzon there's a desire. Why there's a desire? So we learn there's two ways. One is due to a reason. Now we're talking about the one that's not due to a reason. So this Ratzon itself is concealed and unlimited. There's no limit. For example, let's say you want to run a marathon of 1,000 miles. So beside the Ratzon, you can want it, but Peil Mamish, your faculties won't allow you to because you don't have the power to do it. So the Ratzon on its own is a force from the soul that says, I want something, I am drawn to it. And in it, we're going to learn in a moment, there's also Midas. So the Ratzon itself, just like the Ratzon itself is concealed and unlimited, Kach, Kol HaKeches Yesh Boi. And we have to say that the Ratzon has, because the way God created everything encompasses everything. So the Ratzon has within it the Midas, has in it all the Koiches actually. Ratzon has Chochmah Sheba Ratzon and Bina Sheba Ratzon and Das Sheba Ratzon and Chesed Sheba Ratzon, but it's all in the Ratzon. Is a desire to do kindness. And then there's the emotion of kindness, the desire to feel kindness or love. And there's the love itself. So the Ratzon, the Koiches within the Sheyesh Boi, Hema built in Mugbalin. They too are not limited. And I would assume also that's why they're called dark mountains, because they're concealed. They're concealed. Now you could ask the question, maybe the Ratzon has no structure altogether. Maybe the Ratzon is just electricity. It's electricity of the soul being drawn, and the shape and form happen in the spheres. So we learned in volume 1 that due to the interface where God wants everything to be interactive with everything else, he made it in a way that the spheres exist not just in their actual state, like faculties in the human being, but they also exist in the superconscious level. And we even learned they exist lifnei hatzimtzum, spheres hagnuzas. Though they're not actual spheres, but God is envisioning these spheres. So bottom line is that the structure of our lives is rooted also in our superconscious states and even higher. So Ratzon therefore has the faculties, but they're still in a very amorphous and almost like potential state in the Ratzon level. So they're unlimited and they're dark. They're not revealed. In contrast to the Ratzon that he said, the Midas, what did he say before? The Midas al Piatam. Yeah. The Midas al Piatam is illuminated. The Midas within Ratzon are not illuminated. They're dark. Okay. V'hu inyan. And this is the inyan when we say about the God. We say Yada Gdula, the Yada Chazaka. So there's 4 different expressions where you say God's great hand, his powerful hand. There are more expressions. So he says, what does that mean? Yada Gdula, Yada Chazaka. Shemispashtim b'pchinas bli gvul. So Yad here is referring to a form of expression, like a midah, like a faculty, or a faculty, let's say, a koyach. But by the Eibishter, it's a Yad HaChazaka. It's not just a Yad. It's a very powerful or great Yad HaGdela, Yad HaChazaka. That they extend bli gvul. That's what Chassidus teaches. Because they're not midas yet that are defined by the faculties. They're defined by Ratzon. And in Ratzon, there's a certain unlimited element to it. That's why they're called also Torah Chashecha, the darkened mountains. I'm wondering, he doesn't say the word because they're Behelam, he just says Bli Gvul. I don't think he means that Torah Chashecha, the darkness is the Bli Gvul. It's just they go hand in hand. The concealed state is also a Bli Gvul. Let me just see the language here a second. Okay, yeah, because he said before, since the midas and the ratzon are not be'erech hakeli, they're all about the desire of the soul. The einam bechinas hagili, they're not in the form of gili, umishum zeh, and because of that, their midas built in mukbal. Exactly. Like I said, you could desire to run 1,000 miles, or you could desire to throw a stone 1,000 miles, but that desire has a certain, because it's still in a concealed state, potential state in a way, that's why it's unlimited. But when it expresses itself in a faculty, keli, then it has to be fitting to the keli, and your keli also that limit. Now with the Eibishter, of course, he has both elements. We don't have actual Bli Gvul in our actions. By the Eibishter, the fact is his Ratzon is actually part of God's infinite capacity. But then the Eibishter also shows God wanted that the godliness should manifest in spheres that have structure and limit in Chesed and Gvura. So basically, the Chesed in Ratzon is Bli Gvul. The Chesed in Atzilus, in the actual Elam Atzilus, Eretz B'Kelim, has a Gvul to it, relatively speaking. So in a sense, you have the archetypes of the Midas in the Ratzon already. That's a higher level in the levels of Kesser and Ratzon. Okay. And nevertheless, Gam b'bchinas midas sheberatzon, though the midas of the Ratzon are much loftier and more abstract and unlimited level and concealed level, nevertheless, also in those midas sheberatzon, yesh b'chinas moker hamelidon. So though they're not emotions as we know them in the actual conscious faculties, yet they also have a source that gives birth to them. Just like the emotions in the Ratzon HaTacht have something that gives birth to them. We know Chabad, the contemplation that give birth to them. Also in the Ratzon HaElyon, even though it's L'mayla Midas, nevertheless, the emotions in there that are concealed and unlimited also have something that gives birth to them. Where do they come from? So because again, the way God created the whole system, he wanted every level that's there in a more tangible level should also exist in a less tangible level. So the interface and the union and the Achdus Hashem that we create is as complete as possible. So basically, to put it in simple Avodah Dika terms, we always hear about the difference between, let's say, Avodah Pnimius, where a person who has a mind and a heart, and they work hard at relating to God and connecting to God through their mind and their emotions. And people on very high levels that can do that. Then we talk about Anoshim Pshutim, simple people who don't have the mind and the emotions, but they committed to Hashem through their actions. Like in a way, like the determination we spoke about. Mesiras Nefesh, complete Pshitus, Kabbalah Sale. Now, what's the mile in each one? We know that the first level brings godliness in a revealed way. It manifests, it permeates, it's more sustainable in certain ways because it's internalized. Whereas the Kabbalah Sale part, its quality is that it touches the core. That's higher than all the Giluyim and all the revelations. Like the example I've given many times from the Baal Shem Tov, Tefillah La'ani, why you should pray like a pauper. Like the pauper who doesn't appreciate all the glamour and all the glitz and all the revelations of godliness, go straight to the etzem. Simple, like a child speaking to God. Kukuriku, story of Baal Shem Tov. The farm boy, he didn't know, he saw everybody crying and praying. He didn't know Hebrew, he didn't know anything, so he cried from his heart. What only sound he knew how to make, it was the call of a rooster that he heard every morning in the farm. So he cried kukuriku, and that pierced the heavens. But of course, we understand that's not what we educate our children to cry kukuriku. We teach them alibes, we teach them how to daven, we teach them how to pray, how to speak to God with words. You want the passion and the sincerity of the farm boy, but you also want the knowledge and the mind and the heart be engaged in it, so it permeates you. With the child, with the farm boy, he touched the core, but he has not yet really been not internalized in his life and his mind and his emotions and so on. So you really need both. One is like etzem, one is giluyim. I'm saying it in context here because so you could think, okay, these are two different worlds. The world of etzem is only touched upon when you reach that type of pure, innocent, childlike attitude. And the world of intelligence, emotions requires sophistication and hard work and learning and studying and growing and so on. But Chassidus really explains that's not the case. Even in the Mesiras Nefesh, so to speak, or the Kabbalah Sale, or the Ratzon alone, there's also the structure of Chabad, Chagas, and Nihi. However, there what dominates is Ratzon. I want. You don't sense and you don't feel the intelligence or the emotions there. There it's the Ratzon. It's like the Ratzon HaMelech. I want it. But the Ratzon also has all these levels within that. Just like the other way around. The faculties and the attributes of Atzilus, where they are Eris and Kalim, localized and limited and revealed, they too have a Ratzon within them. Remember, there's a Keser within Chachma. There's a Keser within Bina. There's a Keser within Das, and there's a Keser within Chesed, and so on. The Ratzon to love. The question is what the focus. Is the focus on the desire? Is the focus on the object of the object of desire? And put it in different words, every day when we say the brachas, we say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu la'aniach tefillin. Just as one example. What are we saying in this bracha? Two things. First is the first half that's equal in all mitzvahs. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed is you, God, the King of the universe. Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu. That sanctified us with these mitzvahs and you commanded us. That's Ratzon. That's Ratzon Elyon. That Ratzon can then go to the next part. La'aniach tefillin, leisha basukah, l'dok ner Shabbos kodesh. The second part, the end of the bracha, is the specific how that desire is now manifest. It's manifest in tefillin, in tzitzis, in other mitzvahs, and so on. Pesach al-chilas matzah. In shorter brachas, the same idea. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, borei minei mezainis, borei priya eitz, shahakol niyeh b'dvarei. Boire Priya Gofen, Boire Priya Adoma. So bottom line is, in our very brachas that we say all the time, we're right away referring to both the God's will and what do you want? So what the mile of each, the will connects us more to the godliness in it. Because in a certain way, as Chassidus says, the Ratzon is equal everywhere. God's will does not split into parts. He wants different things, but the will itself is a reflection of his will. That's why when you do one mitzvah, you put it from another mitzvah, because all the mitzvahs are connected on the Ratzon level. But then you're lacking one critical thing. The Ratzon is in details. The world is created with a structure. And you want to be mamshich, to draw the Ratzon Hashem, that makiv dikar Ratzon. That's an equalizer into each particular aspect of our lives, into cake, mezainis, wine, water, fruits, vegetables, etc. So the point, or the different mitzvahs that I mentioned before. So you could say these are two different realities. One is the Ratzon. No, Chassidus says in the Ratzon you also have in subtle form all the structure, and in the structure you also have in subtle form the Ratzon. So there's the Ratzon within the details, and there's the details within the Ratzon, if you want to put it in different terms. So you want to build a house. God wants this world to be a dira b'tachtenim. In his desire to do so, he already envisions all the details. But the focus there is on the will. God's will, he wants a home. Then comes the other part where you come to build it. So like Moshe Rabbeinu was the visionary of the Mishkan. What do I want? V'shachanti b'seicham. I want to dwell among you. Then comes Bezalel, the architect, and he builds it piece by piece. And you need both. You need the overarching Ratzon, and you need the details which are implemented through the particular attributes or faculties. So there you have a perfect picture of the eloquence of an interface. The Ratzon, so to speak, is representing more the godliness in it. Obviously, the details are also godly, but the details, you have to focus on the detail. Chesed is chesed, gvura is gvura. You'll soon see how this comes together. This is the context of all of Ayin Beis that I'm really doing right now. But to explain this piece. So basically he's saying, so this level of Ratzon, even though it's true that the midas there are concealed, dark mountains, and in the form of Bligvul, they're not structured, in other words, not parameters, defined parameters, and they still have also a process, like in the Ratzon HaTachton. And what is that process? In the Ratzon there's also Chabad, just like there's Chagas, Midas, there's Chabad. Shenikra tam komus l'Ratzon. That's called the concealed reason within Ratzon. So till now we were saying the Ratzon is L'mayla Midas, but the truth is, what he's introducing here, which is a big theme of Chassidus in general, also in the Biuri Hazer that he cited, that there is a tam, except the tam is only known to God. It's a concealed tam. Like, for example, he brings, I don't know if he's going to bring it here, Shteik kachola b'machshava, that even though when God said Shteik, when the Malachim and Moshe complained to God and said, how could you allow the 10 greatest people in the generation to be massacred so brutally, the 10 martyrs that we read about in Yom Kippur, Asara Arugi Malchus. So God says, Shteik kachola b'machshava, be silent. That's how it arose in my thought. So Chassidus says, what is this? God is just being stubborn and just saying, that's what I want, and that's it. He doesn't need to explain it to anyone. So it says, no, that means there's a tam kamus. There's a reason, but you will not understand the reason. In other words, there's a tam goli, you could see these are God's reasons. Every one of us could understand it. So he's saying now that the Ratzon Elyon, he's talking now obviously Lamaila. The Ratzon Elyon, even though at the surface it seems like it's just that's the Ratzon and that's it, but the Ratzon also has a tam kamus, a chabad within it. That's what he's saying now. Da'agam, I'm going to stop in a moment, but just want to finish the section. Da'agam she'ein tam l'Ratzon, even though the expression is ein tam, there's no reason for Ratzon, because that's what he wants. We're not talking about Ratzon HaTachton, we're talking about Ratzon HaElyon, not the Ratzon that's driven by reason. Hainu shelo yesh tam nigla, that means there's no revealed reason. Shu b'chinas tam v'seichel mamish. A revealed reason is a tam v'seichel mamish. There's an actual, tangible reason and logic behind it. Aval yesh tam komus l'rotzen. There's, however, komus means like concealed, covered. There's a concealed reason in the rotzen. She'ena b'chinas seichel mamish. You can't call it seichel mamish because seichel mamish is what we understand that we can relate to. But it's rather, it's called like a reason, and a tam also comes from the word taste, like pleasure. There's a tam v'tainug, which is the cause for this rotzen. So, for example, we say, even though a taiva is not a reason, there's no kasha and a taiva, but it's a driving force for that desire. He says, it's not literally pleasure. It's only how tainug comes in the form of chachma, because we're talking about Chabad, chachma within Ratzon. Below they say maybe it means dirsha avaya b'motzi. I'm going to have to look it up, where he discusses how tainug manifests in chachma. So bottom line is that when the desire, even the Ratzon Elyon has in it, also Chabad, just as it has midas, but it's all on that higher level. And that's why this reason does not limit the emotions. The reason in the faculties there, it's limited because they're eres b'kelim, they're structured emotions. But the emotions in Ratzon are not limited because the tam itself is also not mamish seichel. It's not mamish a structured reason. It's more of a concealed reason and something that is manifest in some form, but it's not fully structured as it would be in the revealed faculties. Because they're not level of seichel. As I said before, when you have a specific logic, so the midas are driven by that logic. If the logic no longer applies, the midas go away. Or the midas are limited based on that logic, I should say. Whereas when it comes from Lamaila in Ratzon, so because it's Lamaila Meseichel, it's not Seichel Mamish, so the midas also are still in its very early stages and therefore also unlimited. Let me finish the paragraph. U'makol mokim has abchinas tam v'chachma, and nevertheless it's called tam, a reason and wisdom. V'nikra chachma stima, and this is the level that's called chachma stima, the concealed wisdom, what we called earlier the superconscious wisdom. Ubina stima, and the concealed and superconscious. Bina is basically the root for chachma and bina that are revealed, that we are familiar with. This is how it's all in this superconscious state. Like we say, chakim, he's wise, but not with a knowable wisdom. Maven, he understands, but not with a knowable understanding. So we can't say that Ratzon doesn't have these elements, but we can also not say that they're like ours. They're in what we would call a superconscious state of chacham and bina, which in turn give birth to midas in Ratzon, which are concealed and unlimited. And that's how in Ratzon Elyon you have a parallel, not exactly, but a parallel to the same idea that you have in Ratzon HaTachton. What he didn't discuss yet is, what is the Metzach? The Metzach is the Heskim that he said exists also in Ratzon. So we'll need to continue in the next paragraph for that. But that sums up this paragraph. And now I'll stop if anybody wants me to clarify. And remember, as I said, he did not finish the topic. In the next line, in the next page, he's going to go, but what is the Heskim in Ratzon Elyon? Where's the Metzach? Now listen, all this 3-4 lines in Zohar, look how many pages are needed to explain this cryptic Zohar. What does Metzach mean altogether? And what is the Metzach of Zohar? What is the forehead of Arich and what's the forehead of Atik? That's all this is coming to explain it in a very interesting breakdown. Okay, any questions? Go ahead.
He's saying that Tam comes L'Rotzon is Kemoi Tam V'Tainug, Aval Eino Ibchinas Tainug Mamesh. Why not?
So read on. Why not? Because Ratzon is lower than Tainug. So basically, it would be that there's something driving the Ratzon, but Ratzon has not become Tainug. It's more like a let me put it in words. Let's talk a moment about how it is on the conscious level. So on the conscious level, you contemplate and you come to understand and appreciate that the Eibishter wants you to not give in to your natural taivas. So you develop a rotzen based on that. Or even better, where he speaks about the tainus cholim, that's tainug loy. So therefore, his desire now is, even though naturally a person does not like to fast, fasting is painful. It's yisurim. It's one of the heyinuyim of Yom Kippur, to withhold yourself from naturally eating. But now, because you want to tikkun on your tainus cholim, it's a tainus cholim, you want to tikkun on you had a dream, and you know that the fasting is good for you. It's like somebody beginning to enjoy something that they naturally would not enjoy because they're going to lose weight. But they enjoy their diet because they know what it's going to lead them to. So you could say there's a tainug there, correct? But the truth is the tainug is really manifest more in a intelligence that's directing this rotzen. And the intelligence is driven by the tainug. So I think what he wants to say is that tainug does not become rotzen. It's driving the rotzen through the seichel, the chokhmah that the tainug is informing, that in turn is directing that the rotzen should appreciate this behavior. So I think what he wants to say, because he doesn't want to say it's tainug, he wants to say it's rotzen. It's remember, we're going to get to rotzen as being like the determination that's just a heskim. So I think that's why he doesn't want to call it tainug mamish.
Oh, because you can have the rotzon without the tainig, but the tainig sort of has to be there with the rotzon, and it doesn't have to always be together. I think that's what you were saying.
Also, because tainug is a higher level. Tainug is the level of atik. I think in the Maimer B'Yuri Azeir, he speaks about this as well. In the Maimer B'Yuri Azeir, in Hazinu, he says the following. It's maybe necessary to mention here, I'm thinking. He says like this. He asks a question. The question he asks like this. Generally speaking, you say that tainug, anything a person wants means that it comes from some type of pleasure that they have. That's why they want it. It says like this. I'm reading from B'Yuri Azeir that he quoted on the last page. We see in the person below, in a human being, that every desire a person has in any matter, oh no, machmas, sorry. Machmas. You have to say every desire comes due to the fact that the human being is getting pleasure from this thing. Al-Kain Yitzabay, that's why he wants it. And if he does not get pleasure from it, he has no interest in it. No desire. So he says like this now. And l'cheda is understood from this. That based on this, you would think to say that the tainug that manifests in desire is like in the same level and comes together with the rotzen. Because as soon as he has pleasure, miyad yilo yarotzen. As soon as he has pleasure, immediately he'll have a desire for it. So the tainuk is revealed just as the rotzen is revealed. See, but then he says, but how does this say, sir? But this contradicts the ain't tam l'rotzen. This seems to contradict the fact that there is no reason for desire. So how does that consistent with what we said here? That shatam hu einig, kigol b'chinas taimim b'tainug, the taste and pleasure is the level of pleasure. Just as a person, for example, has pleasure from something min mesikus shebetam aperis, the sweetness in fruit, sweet fruit, he has pleasure. So how does that consistent with saying ein tam l'rotzen? That there's no tainuk, so to speak, no pleasure in rotzen. So the pleasure is concealed and it's not found in the rotzen. Why? Because the rotzen is beyond l'mayla min hatam. And here we say that the pleasure is higher than the rotzen and drives the desire. So which one is it? So he says, Acha inyan, there are two types of pleasure. There's a pleasure that's felt. And in that sense, you could say, Ein tam l'rotzen. The rotzen doesn't necessarily feel the tainuk. And then there's a tainuk that's not felt. A tainuk bilti murgish. And that drives everything. I think based on that, you understand why you can't say rotzen is tainuk. Because rotzen is more the desire, you want it, but you don't always feel the pleasure that's behind the scenes, even though there is a pleasure behind it. That's what it looks like he says here. That's why I just read it. There's more to this topic, but I think just could help understand this a bit. I hope that was helpful a bit. Okay. Any other questions?
How do you explain, with this definition, how do you explain the muscle you just gave where somebody wants to lose weight and then eventually he'll start feeling pleasure from it? It seems like the opposite way.
What do you mean? That shows you that when you contemplate on something, you can come to create a desire for something that naturally would go against your nature. That was the point with that. What are you asking me? I'm not clear.
No, and ultimately you said it gives you the
because the
pleasure, but ultimately not chatila. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't understand it exactly.
I don't know, but ultimately, the point there is what he said earlier, that when you understand the good reason for it, your rotzen can override your natural tendencies and your natural pleasures. That's all. That's the point that's being made there. When you start getting that pleasure, you can get it right away. You can get it later. It doesn't. I don't know if there's a difference.
Yeah, but in this case, rotzen is causing the pleasure, not pleasure causing the rotzen. That was my only point.
Correct. That's right. Rotzen is causing the pleasure, and what's causing the rotzen? The logic behind it, because the rotzen understands that this is good for you. That's what he said on the previous page, I believe. Yeah, that rotzen manig hamidus. Yeah. Okay, any other questions anybody wants to ask?
This level of super consciousness is still in the world of tikkun. Is that correct? It's not tohu. We're not talking about tohu yet here.
What do you mean yet? Who said we're talking about tohu altogether? There's no tohu.
That's what I'm saying. It's all tikkun. This level of super consciousness in Kesser is all tikkun.
Why would you think otherwise?
I'm trying to think about these midas over there. That's in a super conscious level, and the midas of tohu, which were, ein hiskalos.
No, there's nothing. That's not at all connected
here. Right. Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the second thing is the emotion.
This
Go
is
ahead.
Kesser of Atzilus. This is Kesser of Tikkun, if you wish. Yeah, we're not talking about Toyo at all here.
Okay. And the other, when you gave the Ratzon, you said Ratzon is, Oneg is the source of Ratzon. You want something because you get pleasure from it. But what about the Ratzon that derives from escaping pain, not pleasure, that you're escaping a negative situation? You just don't want to be, you're in Kabul right now. You want to get out of Kabul. So it's not, you don't have pleasure. None of that Ratzon is based on any pleasures. It's just from fear, from scared.
Or maybe the pleasure or the pleasure that you want to live. So that causes you to have fear of being hurt.
I mean, that would be really concealed. Certainly the level of the active level that you're reacting on would be a level of just escaping pain, I would think.
Yeah, but why you don't want pain? Because you want joy. I mean,
it's certainly a different, it would seem like different emotion, completely different kind of basis here. One is wanting pleasure, like a positiveness is a negativeness. One is I can understand oneg being the source of desire for positive things, but then there's a not to do something. I mean, to escape a negative thing. I wouldn't call that a pleasure. That's a source of my ratzon. My ratzon is to avoid a negative thing, which is not.
That's just how it's manifesting, but it's driven by the will to live, and the will to protect yourself from danger. So, or the pleasure of that. When I say pleasure doesn't always mean good ice cream. Pleasure means the desire, the deeper inner essential pleasure of the soul for certain things in life. I mean, when we avoid negative things, let's say that go against God's will, is because we know that will not give God pleasure and it will give him the opposite. I mean, if you want to put it that way. I don't see the relevance here, really. I mean, the bottom line is Tainug and Ratzon are the two driving forces. Ratzon is a desire, a will, and a Tainug is the so-called the cause behind that will. So whether it's a Tainug against pain or Tainug for pleasure, to me, it's all in the same category.
Really? We'd call that Tainug. Because, I mean, people would say survival of the fittest, for example, which is the basic drive, according to the biologists. Not obviously Torah, but survival of the fittest is certainly a struggle, and the deepest ratzon is just to survive. It's not for pleasure.
Why not? The pleasure of a species that wants to perpetuate itself.
Okay, so that's a very concealed level, deep level, because you're acting on a desire ratzon for just surviving. Not struggling for, not asking for ice cream, or not asking for love, or not seeking something positive. You're just trying to avoid the negative consequences.
Because the negative takes away from what is positive to you. You can't have pleasure of life if you're dead.
Okay, so it's okay. So if you're going to say that the pleasure is so deep that you're acting on a
I honestly don't
see that.
I mean, I'm talking how Chassidus doesn't make such a distinction. I've never seen such a distinction. I would suggest you learn the Maimarim on Ratzon and Tainug. In Samach Vav, there's a bunch of Maimarim on this. Here we're just touching upon it, but it's a really different discussion altogether, not really relevant to this at all.
Okay, fine.
But there are whole Maimarim that talk about Ratzon and Tainug, also Nayim Beis as well.
Right. The other last question is, when you give an example of Asher Kirisano, the bracha, Asher Kirisano, and then say the specific to fill in or whatever, obviously that was a level of Ratzon or Tachton. You weren't using that example for Ratzon or Elyon, were you? I
was using it for both. I mean,
because basically, if you're using it for Ratzon and Elyon, the first part of the Ratzon there would be inherently would necessitate seichel, because you can't say Baruch Atah Hashem, who's Hashem, Asher Kishano, who that He commanded us, who's us. There's a whole level of understanding there that's required to make that ratzon
Well, let's talk about that's from the lens of the human being. If you talk from the lens of God, God says, I have a rotzen that's not with tam. This is what I want. I want you to fulfill my desire, my will. Then he says, what does the will consist of? Tefillin, tzedakah, not tzedakah because there's no bracha on tzedakah. Tefillin, tzitzis, the other mitzvahs. So from the point of view of above, you also have the two elements, the ratzon of Hashem and then what God wants, the specifics of what he wants. So you could apply it both ways.
Yeah, but the bracha, we're saying it's us speaking to God.
This is not a discussion on brachas. I was explaining that in the bracha you have two elements, ratzon and detail.
I thought it was very interesting, connection, but I just wanted to clarify. It seemed like that was on the lower level.
Not necessarily, no. I just explained. God has a desire for mitzvahs. That's the ratzon elyon for mitzvahs. It doesn't have a reason. I mean, there's the deeper reason that he says here behind the scenes, the concealed one, and then the specifics of the mitzvahs. Like he says by Matan Torah. First, Kabbalah Malchus, there's like Shema Yisrael, and then Baruch Shem, and the mitzvahs, the specifics. Kabbalah Sel. I mean, God also had the ratzon, there's a general ratzon, and then there's the specifics of what he wants. Okay. Any other questions? If not, we'll stop here at the bottom of page 1238, the end of the paragraph. I'm going to read the Biyurei Hazer a little more. I think it's relevant to this whole discussion here. I've got to figure it out.